Hello and welcome to the Tampa-Hillsborough County Public Library's virtual program for the City of Tampa's Archives Awareness Week. My name is Brianna Keller. The City of Tampa highlights this week every year to celebrate Tampa's birthday, July 15th of 1887. This evening we have a wonderful presentation on genealogy, your photos, dating, storing, and improving. Our presenter is John Beaumont, who has 30 years of genealogy experience and worked on his genealogy research while traveling extensively. John pioneers using AI technology with genealogy to enhance his research. And now I will turn things over to John.
Thanks, Brianna. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining in. We're going to cover almost 200 years of photographs here, starting at the very beginning, ending up with artificial intelligence, and we'll talk about a number of things as we go through. What we'll talk about is the types of historical photographs and how to preserve photographs that you might have in your collection. What kind of analysis we can do ourselves for dating photographs and what techniques we can use. Now, we'll talk about right at the end about how we can use artificial intelligence to date photographs, quote unquote, automatically. But obviously, as researchers, we need to know how that comes about. I'll talk a little bit about repair and restoration of photographs, which is a really new subject. It's been around for a couple of years, but we can talk about colorization and repair. I'll talk about a quick case study, and then Brianna and team will collect any questions and answers, and we'll see what we can do at the end if there's any Q&A. So with that, we'll get moving along, and we'll move to the types of historical photographs that you may have in your collection. And the first real commercial type of photograph that was available, people will have maybe heard of this, is a daguerreotype. This was around 1840 to 1860, almost like artwork. It's a one-of-a-kind, very high detail. If you have anything like this in your collection, congratulations. They typically come in very, very ornate frames and boxes with velvet inner linings to stop them being damaged. Obviously, if you have these, we need museum type of archival within, keeping these safe. So you will need airtight cases, protective glasses to minimize any humidity and that kind of stuff. Special handling of these needed. At a time, they were very expensive. Only very rich people could afford to have a daguerreotype taken. And surprisingly, there were very detailed photographs. So we can see the lady in the top right here, which is amazingly holding a daguerreotype of what we think is her husband. And you can look at the amazing detail. Let me try and go into this a little bit deeper, but you can see here that she's holding a daguerreotype, and you can see the level of detail here on these photographs, almost like artwork. So those were around for a little while. Then we moved to the ambrotype. And the ambrotype, if you watch some of the old movies where people have the big flash thing going on and a big frame, that's when they were putting photographs onto glass. So the daguerreotype was copper plate. This is now glass. So the ambrotype is pinned on glass with a black background. So we can imagine if we're looking at keeping these photographs safe, they're very, very fragile. They're normally backed with black velvet or black varnish at the back. And both, I think, daguerreotypes and ambrotypes, if you have them in your collection, you'll be considering these as family heirlooms. They need to be kept safe, handled in boxes, only kept brought out with gloves almost. So it'll be interesting to, if you look in the comments, if anybody's got any of these in their collection. So daguerreotypes and ambrotypes, 1840 to about 1865, very, very expensive. Typically rich families used them. You had to go into a studio. But moving on, and I wanted to pull some of these tintypes. Many people have seen these tintypes. This was the next iteration of photographs. And because they're called tintypes, they're actually made on tin, often called ferrotypes. And they were around for almost a second. You could go and get a tintype made. And you could go to Oldsmar Flea Market, I'm pretty sure, on any weekend and pick up some of these tintypes for a few dollars. They're still around. You can pick them up on eBay. And they're made of metal obviously prone to rust and bending and scratching. So we need to store these flat in archival sleeves, make sure there's no moisture around. Now, these were portable. So as opposed to daguerreotypes and ambrotypes, which you had to go to a studio, tintypes they could bring the studio to you or actually work in the field. So many people had their tintype taken at a state fair or something along those lines. And it was the first really way of photojournalism. If many people may have seen the images of the American Civil War, the carnage after battle, those were mostly taken on tintypes. So it was the first really iteration of photojournalism we're using tintypes. And we can see some good examples here of tintypes made directly on a thin sheet of metal. And we see them loose or in sleeves or in little frames. And if you look at them, you can see that they've got a reflective quality to them if you pick up one on a flea market. But these are easily available if you want to add anything to your collection. As I say, we can pick those up on eBay for a couple of dollars. May not be your family, but they're always interesting to look at. Now, if anybody has watched Downton Abbey or any of the period dramas where a visitor will come to a house, maybe even Sherlock Holmes, and will leave their card because as a visitor would leave their card. This is not a business card they're leaving. It's what's called a carte de visite, and it's a small photograph. It is about the size of a business card, but it's now we're looking at cardstock. So if you remember, the first photographs were on copper plate, the next photographs were on glass, tintypes obviously on tin. Now we're actually moving to cardstock, and cardstock obviously has all the issues that any paper product would have. They can deteriorate rapidly, they can get mold, they can get damp. So if you have any of these, they'll need to be stored in an airtight archival quality box. But as we said, visitors left them, and also now going back well over 100 years, these were the first entertainment type of photographs. So you could collect carte de visites of Abraham Lincoln or Queen Victoria or any of the social or political figures of the day. So people did collect these cards, a bit like cigarette cards that came around a little bit later on. So royalty actors of the day, politicians. So we can see one there of Lincoln. Let me just move it down a little bit. So this was a signed carte de visite of Abraham Lincoln. This is George Bernard Shaw here, and then this is a typical one of John Henry Foley from the Museum of Ireland here. So again, cardstock, we have to be very careful how we preserve these photographs. If you have them in your collection, congratulations. Again, typically these were wealthy people, but people did collect them. You may have something written on the back of them. So we have them. So the next one are cabinet cards. This is where we get into many genealogists will have cabinet cards at home. And these are just awesome photographic memorabilia, if you like. They're similar cardstock to carte de visites, but they're larger and they're called cabinet cards because typically people put them in the cabinet, so we're very proud of them. Normally taken in a studio. And part of the richness of these photographs is that the studio would often emboss the back of the card and emboss the bottom of the photograph. So we can see the images here. This is a typical cabinet card with a beautiful embossing on the back of it, saying where it was taken, and at the bottom here. And equally another one here from Denver with a beautiful embossment of the studio and the studio here at the bottom as well. So what people did typically, as a few years later on, as they had the cabinet cards and photograph frames came into fashion, they would actually, unfortunately, cut out the photograph and put it in a photograph frame, so the bottom bit of the studio would be lost. But if you turn these over or take them out of the frame, you might see the studio in the back. And the reason the studio is important, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, is many studios we can date. So if we went into this studio in Denver, we may be able to find the dates that this studio was in business and actually date the photograph from it. So again, cardstock. Ideally, we store them flat in boxes with tissue paper, special acid-free tissue paper separating them. And we'll talk about how to digitize them later on, but these need to be handled with great care. And often they're peeling, and we'll see the brown mold in the corner. In fact, this one at the top here, you can see the little bit of brown mold here. Again, like carte de visites, you could buy these ones with Mark Twain, Buffalo Bill Cody, Sitting Bull, to put on your cabinet too. So it didn't just have to be family. Very, very interesting cabinet cards, and many people, many genealogists, I won't say most, but many genealogists have cabinet cards or the cardstock from cabinet cards in their collection. Beautiful photographs. Now, getting a little bit nearer to present day, something that was used extensively in Europe. It was used a little bit in America, but not as extensively in Europe. Is a thing called a personalized postcard. So what typically you would do is you could take a photograph into a studio, a photograph like this photograph here, and take it into a studio or ask the studio to take a picture, and they would emboss it into a postcard. And we could use those postcards to send to family, individuals, tell them about personal events. People put weddings on there or just snapshots of their children. So here's a picture of my mother here. And that was sent to some of our friends and relatives, I think because she was 5 years old at the time. And this is actually my grandmother so extensively used. Again, anybody who's looked at old postcards will see the images start to peel away from the card. So we have to keep them away from dampness, store them in acid-free sleeves. We avoid light exposure. We can start to see that these photographs gray out a little bit. And eventually all these photographs, if we don't store them correctly, will just be very blurry gray. We can see those with, if anybody used the instant cameras back in the day, as soon as you tore the photograph out, within a year it would decay. So they still need special preservation. This needs special archiving, and they will deteriorate pretty quickly if we don't store them correctly. But very useful. And again, if the postcard is actually being posted, we can see from the frank here when it was posted, and it will give you a lovely view to friends and family. Probably we've talked about the first photojournalism. We talked about the first entertainment photographs. This is probably the first type of personalized messaging. So maybe the first text messages back in the day, in the early 20s and 30s, where you could mail a postcard in the morning in a city and somebody would receive it in the afternoon. So again, the first messaging, early forerunner of text messaging. So we've moved really from the daguerreotypes up into the 1900s, 1940s. We're looking at formal photographs. The next stage really of the photographic journey, and I'm missing some of the specialist photographs out here, is what we'd term popular photography. And the box brownie, probably all heard of, was introduced in around 1900. And people could take inexpensive photographs even back then. We've all probably took photographs on film and taken it to Walgreens and CVS. They all used to be black and white. Now we have color zoom, disposable, digital cameras on cameras as well now. So these photographs again will deteriorate over time, and we see some of the examples here that we're starting to fade out. These black and whites are starting to fade out. This is my brother and I. This was a black and white photograph that I colorized. There's a school in England rugby team, and just kind of snaps, but they do deteriorate over time and get blurry, as we can see from this one here. So it's again just as important to protect these, what I call newer photographs, as we would do if we was dealing with an amber type. The films degrade. People have put them in very poor quality photograph albums. If you try and take the cellophane off, it tears the front of the photograph off. There's a thing called vinegar syndrome, where the negatives start to deteriorate and you can smell cellulose acetate smell. And so we need to keep these again in the dry, cool place. Keep them separated with tissue because they can stick together, right? So this is something we all have in our collection. This is probably the backbone of our collection, photographs, where we need to really protect them and make sure as people move, I can't tell you, and we'll all talk about this, how many family photographs have been lost by my family as they've moved from one location to another. So very important we protect these. So what happened after popular photograph, I think for photography, should I say? I think we all know that we're now in a digital age when it becomes to our phones. We was at Busch Gardens, I think, last week, and I would say we took about 60, 70 photographs. So we have a new problem here with digital photographs. We almost have too many photographs. People taking pictures of meals, uh, where we parked the car, all that kind of stuff. So the challenge for new people looking at genealogy, which is a future-facing research as well as a past-facing research, is how do I preserve the right kind of photographs for the future? How do we make sure that somebody who's looking at my family in 40 years' time is looking at photographs that were important to me and not just photographs of what I had for breakfast at Denny's. So that's a challenge. The way I deal with that is we keep all our family photographs in Google and obviously backed up in hard drives, but I keep all the special ones on another cloud service. So we only have the special photographs on that cloud service, which is Amazon Photographs. And then we use the Alexa at home to show the meaningful photographs. The one thing that we need all to be careful of is data corruption, media obsolescence. Well, what I'm talking about there is if you've got photographs on a floppy disk or even a little hard disk, now there is no laptop that will take those. CDs are probably going the same way. Eventually, thumb drives that have a lot of photographs on them will probably go the same way. So digital formats get obsolete fairly quickly. So we always need to be on top of how we're keeping our photographs. Today, obviously, most people keep them on the cloud, but if you keep them locally on your laptop, you've got to think about how you keep them and how you back them up. So regular backups, reliable and multiple storage formats. So I store these on both my laptop. I've got a second storage device here, and I say I use Google and Amazon. The beauty of Google, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, is Google's got face recognition, so I don't have to worry too much about who it is. Google will actually tell me who's in the photograph. So if anybody's got questions or going through this, please shout out and we'll take them at the end. So we've talked about the different types of photographs and talked about archival storage. As part of the archival storage, whatever photograph we're talking about, we need to digitize the photograph. So even if it's an amber type, we need to take a picture, a digital picture, or even a scan of the photograph, and we need to store it. Now, for the vast majority of photographs you have in your collection, the ones that have been popular, you may have hundreds of them. So there's professional scanning services that you can send them to. It doesn't cost a lot, and they'll send it back either on a CD or on a thumb drive, or most often now they'll put them up in the cloud that you can bring them down. Once you've got all your photographs, organize them digitally. And if you're a genealogist, it's very important that you spend some time organizing your digital files to mesh with your research. So if you're embedding photographs into your family tree, how you name them is very important. We talked a little about storage solutions. So how you store them, very, very important. So if you're archiving the old photographs in special boxes with tissue paper, acid-free boxes and all that kind of stuff, that's great. But digital storage is very important too. We'll talk about backups. The final point of the digital side is for all the genealogists out there is that I load photographs up to genealogy sites such as Ancestry or Find My Past. I always put a watermark on my photographs that I'm going to upload. Just not because I mind people using them. I wouldn't put them on a public site. Control them and to make sure that if I see somebody else using a photograph, if it's a similar photograph, I know it's not mine, it's somebody else's. So I always consider putting a watermark. There's some tools out there you can use, but if you're going to put your photographs out there in a public space, maybe even if you wanted to use Facebook, it's always wise to know once you upload a photograph somewhere, you've lost control of it. So that's really talking about the actual photographs themselves. Let's talk a little bit about dating the photographs and what we can look at within a photograph to date them. And I'm sorry if my voice is getting a little bit croaky now. So the key part of any photographic examination is to note every detail. And it may sound obvious, but sometimes we miss the detail by looking at the big picture, so to speak. So here's a couple of examples. This is an uncle of mine. This photograph's around about 100 years old. Surprising amount of detail for the old photographs here. And as I zoomed in, I could actually see this badge. And when I Google the image, I can actually see the writing around the badge here. So this is a Civil War badge. It was given to wounded veterans of Great Britain if there was in the First World War. And he's also wearing, again, a boutonniere. So beyond the photograph, I've got two clues here. This is probably indicative of some kind of formal occasion here. So we'll look at the detail on the photographs. And if we look over here on the man and the lady, if we zoom in here, she's got a wedding and engagement ring. But interestingly, the man doesn't. And it's a somewhat familiar pose. So it could be a brother and sister, but we don't know unless we've done the investigation. It could be a husband. The ages are probably not right to be a father and daughter. And we can also note the type of furniture here. So let me zoom in again here. We can see a type of furniture in the background, a studded chair. So all these things are very important when we're looking at dating the photograph. So what I've found is if I use a magnifying glass and zoom on my computer, I'll get two different results. Sometimes using a magnifying glass in a really strong light will give you better images. Sometimes using a computer zoom will give you better images. So again, important to know every detail there. And when we're talking about looking at the photograph, we talked about the studio type of photographs where there's a studio on it there will give us some images, but often on the back of photograph, and we'll have to take out the frame here, is written a lot of text. And on this example here, somebody's written August 1945, love from mother, which looks like an ink pen. And we can almost tell this is English because of the XXX. Most Americans would put XOXO, right? So this is a traditionally English or British, I would say, notation. Somebody's given the names here and they're written in ballpoint pen, and then somebody else has written again in another ballpoint pen for generations. So what do we do with this? Well, typically we don't always believe it. I've got some photographs in my collection where the names written on the back are actually not correct once I've done research. But it's interesting. So it's something that we need to document. So when we digitize this image and we write a description of this image, we should also digitize the back of the photograph so that it remains together. So, but just to remember that if it's written on the back, it's not always true. The person who wrote Clive, Selena, Denise, and Tom may be right, but they may not be right. In this case, they were right, but not always is the case. And we'll see in the case study where we deal with somebody who's written their names in the wrong order. Now let's look at the indicators of the data that we can look at that the people are wearing or on the people themselves. So clothing, I think, as we all know, is an excellent indicator of the data photograph, especially women's clothing pre-1950. We can almost tell by the shape of the bodice, the sleeves, the collar, almost within 10 years of when that kind of clothes were in fashion. So if you look at these two ladies here, very fashionable ladies, we probably can look by the collar, the pinched waist, the kind of sleeves, the pair she's wearing. and the different kind of lapels, that would date the photograph pretty well. But we're assuming that these people are in a city that was fashionable. Maybe they're from a country where it takes 5 to 10 years for the fashion to get to that particular city. It may not, for instance, in New York, this may be fashionable one time, but in Northern Ireland, it may take a few years for these photographs, these clothes particularly, to be fashionable. So when we're looking at fashion, we need to know the context, and also we need to know the social class. So this unfortunate lady was arrested in 1903 for larceny, and these clothes are probably cast-off clothes that she's got. She's obviously in jail right now from 1903. So we can't just look at those clothes and presume that those clothes were fashionable in 1890, so that's the date. So we do need to know the context and the social class that we're dealing with when we're looking at clothes. And equally, here's a photograph from 1860, and it's from a guy called Charles Dickens, not the writer Charles Dickens, but I wanted to show you this because here's a group of men and they're all wearing almost completely different clothing. But we probably could still date this photograph from the clothing by the type of tie that people are wearing, the types of hats, and maybe the chairs. So we do expect that you will see different kinds of clothing. And this is from a university. I think they're a university pose here. So we do need to be aware to take into account the social class, the location, and the occasion. It could be a wedding or something like that. So moving on to something that's gone completely out of fashion, primarily hats. And hats pretty much went out of fashion, I think probably around 1950s, certainly around the Second World War. And these are again influenced by economy, social class, location, and studios may hand people hats. So if you went to a studio and you couldn't afford the right kind of clothing, often studios back in the day would give you the right kind of hat. So if you look at this picture, which is quite an interesting picture, because it does give the very social classes here. It looks like a fairly formal occasion, but we can see these guys in the foreground here, all wearing top hats and what we call morning suits of some description. And then these chaps here wearing less formal clothes and bowler hats, that kind of thing. The women's hats was somebody wearing a straw hat here, but they're very similar. So when you're looking at your photographs, it's very important to look around, understand what the social context is and how things have changed. But within around the 1900s, about 1880 to 1920, you can get a good grip of the date of the photograph. And we'll be using this actually to date the photograph going forward. So we talked about fashion, we talked about clothes, and we talked about hats. What about hair? And so I actually generated these two photographs from ChatGPT, or images, should I say, rather than photographs. And I asked ChatGPT to give me 6 different generations of women's hair. It's done an okay job, but what it indicates there is women's hair does change by period. So there are a lot of clues in the hairstyle and the clothes of women when that photograph would have been taken. But I asked ChatGPT to generate a similar image for men. As we can see, pretty much all the men's hairstyles could be still in fashion today. The clothes give them away a little bit, but we could really see a man today wearing pretty much any of those hairstyles and possibly even some of those clothing. But again, talking about social context and occasion, this is actually my great grandmother and her sister. And you can see that both got very short hair here. Well, this was taken right after the Second World War, 1946. And very poor areas, people had just gone through the war. They wasn't going to have very ornate hairstyles in London. They're both from London and are actually picking hops in Kent right now. So if we looked at fashion for ladies and looked at fashion for the 1940s, we'd see a different fashion in America than we would do in Europe. And short hair in women is often a telltale sign of either some kind of economic downfall during the Depression or some kind of political upheaval. So we can see here again that these hair is very easy to keep and it's very short. So that's hairstyle. Again, men, very different. Even to the present day, actually thinking about Rachel in Friends, a lot of women went out at the Rachel or the Farrah Fawcett. So hairstyles are still indicative of certain periods, certainly for women. But on the men's side, facial hair is more indicative of a period. So here we have Flo Glorious here, Abraham Lincoln with his famous chin strap beard. We don't see very often. Wilhelm Siemens, who started a Siemens company with mutton chops. These are called mutton chops. I don't think we see these very, I don't think I would call seeing these anytime recently. This is one of my relatives with what we call a full set here. Some men still wear full sets, so maybe that it couldn't be dated, but certainly the necktie he has would date the photograph. And this is the last of our presidents that had facial hair, according to Google. So this is William Taft with his what we call a handlebar mustache. And again, very much in fashion in that period. Some men might wear that now, but it's probably not something we see very often. So again, we can use men's facial hair, if not their hairstyle, as to date photographs. So let's look beyond that a little bit and look at uniforms. So uniform badges and insignia. Up to, I guess, the Second World War, many trades, firemen, nurses, policemen, trades and guilds wore uniforms. So we can date our photographs by looking at the uniforms. And this is a First World War uniform. And again, using Zoom, I was able to actually match this cap badge to a regiment. And because even though it was blade, it had a distinct shape here. And we could see that this is the East Yorkshire Regiment. And we could actually see the badge here. And together with his, was this the rank here, his swagger stick and the uniform, it was actually pretty easy to date that this photograph was taken in 1915 during the First World War. On the other hand, this photograph here looks like a group of firemen with one with a very jolly hat here, and they don't look like a very impressive bunch of firemen, but nonetheless they're dressed as firemen in formal fireman outfit. But these guys, in fact, are all flour mill workers, and they worked for the volunteer fire team at a flour mill. So we can not get taken in by the fact that they're wearing the uniforms. As I say, they were volunteer firemen, and they would brush if there was a fire at the flour mill, and they had these uniforms that they broke out on special occasions. So we can look at different kinds of uniforms. If we looked at nurses, trades and guilds often have special badges and special lapels. If we looked at things like the masons and people like that, they will have special uniforms as well, depending on what lodge they came from. So uniforms, badges, and insignia are very good if people are wearing them to help you date the photograph. So going on to the final part, I think, of looking at photographs really is what's going on in the photograph itself. What else can we use in the photograph to date it? So I talked about this a little bit earlier on. This particular type of furniture here in this particular photograph, it dates the period. Now the backdrop is painted. It's a studio photograph. It's a cabinet card. But this, we can Google this kind of unusual chair that would give us some kind of idea, together with the lady's dress and the kind of crinoline she's wearing and the lace collar of what's going on there. Very aggressive hairstyle as well. So a lot going on in this picture that would help you date it. Moving to this photograph here, which is a photograph of a high street in England. No date, but as we look into the photograph itself, there's lots of things here that we can use to date it. The car, I've actually identified the car, but I've not written on here. But it's a very specific kind of car. As we zoom into this, there's not many cars look like this, and with a little bit of work and a little bit of technique, we might have been able to pull out what the registration plate of that car is. And then signage is another key aspect of a photograph. So up here is an advertisement for cigarettes, Three Castles cigarettes, probably around a certain time, so we can Google that. And another technique is I can make out the sign here, but I can't see it very well. So we can change the color of photographs to help us make out what the sign is here. And this is Benson's Stouts and Ales. But I couldn't make that out using normal photograph. I had to use a technique of just changing the color. And we can see Benson's here, ales and stouts. And can't make that out here, but wines as well. So that's another way of zooming in to the different things. Let's look at the car again. So we can see we probably could just make that out. Geo 148T maybe. And there's ways as genealogists to look at the registration plates, I'm sure. So that's really looking at the photograph itself. Now, the other key part to dating your photographs is it needs to tie in with your family tree. So you'll be doing research and you'll have your relatives. And does the dates within your family tree, that is this person alive from certain dates, does it match to the photograph you're looking at? So it's very important to look at not just the context of your photograph, but you've got to look at in the context of your research. What range does it give? What special events were happening at that time? And we'll see during the case study that we can look at different things, and looking at special events of weddings, births, marriages, anniversaries. We can then use that information to help us date the photograph. So now we've looked at the photograph types, we've looked at types of dating techniques. We can look at how we can get more information on using those techniques. So let's go along. And there's probably no surprise here that the first step is Google or Bing, depends what your favorite is. And I can start Googling, give me images of hats for the 1950s, and we can see all the different images. And I can start looking at different types of hats here, men's hats for the 1920s. So Google is a fantastic resource, and prior to about 2 years ago, it was probably the resource that most people use. There's other ways of doing it, which we'll look at in the end, but this will help you confirm. So if you've got a date and you're looking at a photograph and you're looking at somebody in a collar or a hat, we can then go to Google and we can look at those images. Now, the key technique now to use is actually searching by image. So hopefully most people are aware that I can upload an image to Google and I can search by that image. So in this example, I've searched by this particular photograph. I've just said search this image, and it's come back with very similar images which may have already been dated. So if I can see, for instance, this one has got exactly the same frame here, and this one looks like almost the same pose. So without any other information, I can use Google Images by just dropping an image into Google, or even part of an image. I can begin to date my photograph. So this frame and this frame, as I say, are almost identical, and this pose. So these ones have already been dated, and I can use this to help date my photograph. Now, the next step is beyond all that. If you're having trouble dating your photographs, there's lots of help out there, and two places we can go to. MyHeritage, which is a paid site I use all the time. We also have Roots Chat, where we can upload a photograph, and you see this happening all the time. Could someone please give me an idea of the date of this photograph? There's always dozens of people willing to help. And then even on Facebook, Facebook has got, this is the ancestry.com website or user's website. People are often posting photographs up there asking for help. This is a tintype. You'll see lots of scratches and dents on it. And there are also Facebook pages that specialize in dating photographs, either by country or by type of photograph. So you can, if you've got no other information and you're struggling, you can go to any of those sites and give them as much information as you can. But again, remember, once uploaded, it's lost forever. Now, moving on to the scene in the last, I would say, 2 years, last year, is AI. And we can use some simple conversations to AI and show me the image. And now we're just using AI really as a Google. We're just doing a search here, which is not the best way of using AI. But it'll come back and we can have a conversation with AI, show me images of common women's hats, and ChatGPT and this is Bing Copilot will come back up and show you pictures. So we can use that. And typically when you're dating photographs, it's probably better to use Google search or Bing search to do it this way, because then you can decide what's right or wrong. The way we should use artificial intelligence is having a conversation. And I want to show you a typical conversation. And this is a photograph now. We'll see this a little bit later on. So I go into AI, and if anybody's got any questions on AI, please drop me a line. I'll show you the email again, but I use AI extensively in a lot of my research. And the key with AI is we have a conversation. And this is a conversation I have it. Please examine this family photograph and attempt to date when it was taken. And then another key part of using AI is I want it to tell me what it's using. I don't want it just to come up with data. So please give me all the rationale and items you've led to a conclusion so I can decide whether it's actually making the right conclusion. I want it to tell me what it's used to date it. And I'll give it some information as well. And the more information that we give to AI, the better. And I've just given it very brief that the photograph was taken in London. And then AI comes back and it dates the photograph. It tells me the woman's dress is a high collar, fitted bodice with puff sleeves, as we can see. Popular in late Victorian era. The puff sleeves are characteristic of the 1890s. Style was known as the leg of mutton sleeve. We may have heard that. So it's interactively dating the dress. And for the man, the lapels and the overall cut of the suit is telling AI it's 1890s and 1900s. So it's coming up with a rationale. It's looking at the back. So it's going through all the things we've already talked about. And this is why it's important that we know what it's going to use, because we know whether it's doing the right thing or not. And then it's looking at the background. It tells me it appears to be a cabinet card of a popular photograph, blah, blah, blah. And it's a painted backdrop. So it's looked at this and examined it and said it was a cabinet card. And it comes to, given that the photograph was taken in London and considering the typical delay in fashion trends, is consistent with the style seen in major European cities around the 1890s. And then it basically concludes it was taken between 1890 and 1900. So I've got a little bit more information for AI here. I held this information back. I said the man in the photograph was born in 1853 and died in 1918. The woman was born in 1854 and died in 1932. Would that lead you to change your conclusion? So remember, with AI, this is not a search, this is a conversation. I could take this conversation on a lot longer. And it said, given the birth and death rates of the individuals, it cross-checks the fashion with the data it has, and it comes back with the final conclusion, which correctly dates the photograph between 1890 and 1900. Now, I could have carried on this conversation a little while. I've chosen also to use the black and white photograph so I don't cause any confusion with AI. I could have used a colored photograph, but I've found in some cases the colorization may confuse AI. So I've used black, but use both. It could give you two things. So that's AI. And now we've talked about the manual way of dating it. This is the way I would try and date pretty much any photograph. And many of the systems, like MyHeritage, I believe Family Search, have built this AI tools into their programs. I would prefer to do it manually. I prefer not to go into my heritage, just give them a photograph and let them deal with it. I prefer to have a conversation about my photographs with AI so I can see what it's talking about and I can understand how it's articulating what it's come up with. I have put on my video channel a lot of information about how you can deal with what I call ChatGPT vision. So let's go to repair and restoration real quick. And we can also, I've restored this using MyHeritage, but colorization repair now is pretty ubiquitous. We can pretty much pull it up from everywhere. It's on Ancestry, it's on MyHeritage. I think it's on Google now, on Amazon. So we can take a photograph that originally looked like this and have it colorized. It actually makes the flowers look pretty wilted, actually. And, you know, we're not quite sure. Obviously, this could have been a purple dress, but it's a good repair. And this faded image that you saw at the top, as we discussed, these black and white photographs fade over time. This is what it's come up with. So there was no damage to this photograph. It was just fading fast. Now, this again was taken just after the Second World War. So the fashion colors tie in with the austerity of Britain in the early 1950s. This is my grandmother's wearing a boutonniere, so it's some kind of formal occasion. My grandfather here is looking very dapper. He died in 1959, so it was taken before that. But they look very well dressed. So there was some kind of formal occasion tying to my research. Here's another example, photograph. Let's zoom into this one here. Very damaged, a very bad crease down here. Some creases. Picture of my dad in the military as he was signing up for national service. Repaired the photograph first. So this is a technique. Some systems allow you to repair and colorize. I always find it's better to repair first. So this is the repair. Very impressive. All done with AI. So the way AI works now, artificial intelligence, it's seen millions and millions of photographs. So it knows how to stitch back together the missing parts of a photograph. So it basically restores the photograph by digitizing it out and digitizing it back in. And this is really just based on learning. And then we can colorize the photograph. And having been in the Air Force myself, I can tell you the uniforms and the shirts and the berets and everything are exactly the right color. And so it's colorized. Some color leakage around there, but we can't expect it to be perfect. But all the same, a pretty impressive result from what we started off with. Now, this obviously, the original stays in my collection forever, and the colored ones will as well be digitized. So that's how we repair it. Now, I want to talk about the future a little bit, and we've seen this photograph already. So this was the original photograph that I have in my collection, a cabinet card. And then I restored it. I just colorized it. And the thing I like about the MyHeritage restoration is it doesn't go overboard on colorization. It's very, very sympathetic, if you like. It doesn't put really strong colors in there. It's very sympathetic. What I did was take my grandfather's head.
Hi, I'm Charles William Beaumont,
And
John's
this is what we ended up with.
great-great-grandfather. It's so nice to meet you. I was born in Rickmansworth on November 10th,
So hopefully everybody can
1853.
hear that. But this is my grandfather
father,
talking.
James
We'll
Beaumont.
go back here. So what I've done here is I've cropped and brightened an image, put his image into AI, uploaded a script, which was my family history. And now, again, he's describing.
Hi, I'm Charles William Beaumont,
He,
John's
so
great-great-grandfather.
he's now describing
It's so nice to
my
meet
family
you.
history.
I was
So
born in Rickmansworth on
it's like
November
where he's
10th,
born.
1853.
So this really is the future of AI. Whoops, I'll go back one. This really is the future of AI when it comes to photographs with restored and digitized and brought to life through AI. So that's.
Hi, I'm Charles William Beaumont, John's great-great-grandfather.
So we're kind of running out of time a little bit. So I'm going to just kind of rush through this case study and try and do this really quickly. This is a photograph that I have. This is an old photograph. This is the one that was written incorrectly because somebody had written the names on the back in a different order. So here, I used a magnifying glass. This book is Ben Hare, published in 1880. The studio's name was I.J. Watson. It was in business from 1890 to 1920. So now I'm getting the dates kind of tied in. I don't know the names yet, but I now can look at the colorization and look at the badges. We talked about insignia. These badges will all lead me to conclude that my two uncles here served in the military. These badges showed how long they served during the First World War, which is the whole war. This is his trade, and this one here is a good behavior badge, and given after 3 years of good behavior. It doesn't tell me a lot other than they served for at least 3 years. So given from the photographs, I know that when these guys were demobbed, so they were demobbed in 1919, so these photographs must have been taken before 1919. And because they've got 4 stripes for the First World War, 1918, 14 to 1918, we know we served throughout the war. Then I use Google facial recognition. That tells me that this one is George. Then I looked at the 2 guys in civilian garb. Now this guy on the left here was a prisoner of war, and we can see he was very thin. So now I'm using the context of what he was doing. And this guy here, we saw him earlier, still wearing the badge, was wounded in Gallipoli. He was stabbed and shot, or bayoneted and shot in 1917. So we can date that based on his experience, and we can date the fact that he was released from a concentration camp in January 1919. So now we're tying a photograph together with our research and looked at the book. We can't make out what the book is. We can make out all the people on this. So finally, I know I'm rushing through this, but I've named the people left to right. We know where it was taken, and we know that this guy returned to England on January the 19th, but he got married on the 25th, and this is prior to his marriage. Now, the amazing thing for anybody who does any research is that these 4 young men fought in the First World War. 2 of them in the army, 2 of them in the navy. They all joined up at the beginning of the war, and they all incredibly came back home alive. He was in a prisoner camp, so he kept safe. He was badly wounded, but he lived through it, and they all lived long and happy lives after that. So amazing photograph for our family history. So that kind of ties it up. I'll bounce back to see if there's any questions, but do go to my genealogy channel. It's at Beaumont Genealogy. There's videos here about how we can do photographs, and I have a website as well. So any more information, just drop me a line at john.beaumont@outlook.com. So Brianna, handing back to you, and I'll stop sharing right now. So
Thank you so much, John, for that wonderful talk. Looks like we had one question pop in a little bit earlier, and somebody was asking, does the light from the scanner damage the photos at all? Is that something that they need to be worried about when digitally scanning those photos?
Not that I've never heard of that. It's a good thing to talk about, but I've not heard of the light from the scanner damaging the photographs. It's more likely to be sunlight or something harsh like that damages, but a quick scan, I've not heard of that. But if you're worried about it, just take a photograph of the picture that you need to scan, and that will avoid that.
Okay. Awesome. Let me check, make sure we have any other questions. Doesn't look like we do. I'll give anybody an extra minute or so if they had any last questions to put in there.
Well, I hope you've all enjoyed the presentation. I did rush through it rather. We did 200, almost 200 years of photography in less than an hour. So it's always amazing. And again, AI has changed the game completely. So again, if you want to go to send me an email, john.beaumont@outlook.com. If you've got any questions or need direct into my YouTube channel, I'm more than happy to speak to anybody about this.
Awesome, amazing. Doesn't look like we have any other, looks like we have May I recommend Google's photo scan app for quick scans better than just taking a photo of the photo.
Oh,
So
yeah, there you go. Yeah,
that might
there's a
be
number of apps around. There's lots of things. So before you do anything these days, almost Google if there's a better way, for sure.
perfect. Thank you again so much, John. If you
Thanks,
guys are
Brianna.
looking for more resources on genealogy or family photos, you can find book lists on hcplc.org/archives-awareness, as well as additional resources, including a link to City of Tampa's Archive Awareness webpage, the National Archives, and the History of Genealogy records at Hillsborough County. We also have a subscription to MyHeritage that you have for free using your library card as well.
Lots of good stuff.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good rest of your evening, and goodbye.
Bye, everybody.